Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting today, the 7th of August 2023. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the Palawa community, the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, as the original owners and continuing custodians of this land, Lutruwita, Tasmania, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The Glenorchy Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. The Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of the Council. Planning officers present the assessment and recommendations and then answer any questions of Aldermen. Please note at this stage a decision has not been made on any application. The chairperson invites the applicant and any interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting. Speakers will be limited to 5 minutes. The meeting procedures today are the chairperson may ask the planning officer to comment on any matters raised. The planning authority then discusses the application. For statutory planning applications, the planning authority decides the application and the senior statutory planner explains the appeal rights. For planning scheme amendments, the strategic planner explains the decisions being made by the planning authority and the Tasmanian Planning Commission. We have some legal requirements. So when deciding an application, the requirements of us by law are that we are to seek further the sustainable development objectives of the Act, consider representations received during the public notification period, and make the decision by reference to the current planning scheme provisions. Just note our meeting rules are very relaxed, but we ask that you comply with any directions given by the chairperson and respect other people's views and their right to have their say. Today I note the absence of Mayor Beck Thomas, who is away at the moment. I do introduce to you our Planning Authority members for today. I thank Deputy Mayor Sue Hickey for stepping in as proxy. I have Alderman Josh Cockshut, Alderman Russell Yaxley and Alderman Steve King. Jan Dunsby, and I'm the Acting Chair today. And just ask now for any pecuniary interest in the matters that are listed on the agenda today. Do we have any interest here from other staff as well? No pecuniary interest has been declared. Item 4, we have confirmation of minutes. So the minutes of the Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting held on the 10th of July 2023 have been presented to our authority members. Could I ask to have a mover for those minutes, please, and a seconder? Moved by Alderman King, seconded by Alderman Yaxley. Is there any comments on the minutes at all?
Thanks, Chair. I know there's been a minor correction, but other than that, they seem to be true and correct. So
thank you. The version that you have is the correct version. Thank you. If there's no discussion on the minutes, I'll put the motion. All in favour, please raise your hand. Move unanimously. Move on now to item 5, so proposed use and development, extension to police station, emergency services, 315 to 319 Main Road, Glenorchy. And I ask our planning officer, Peter Coney, to take us through this application.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very simple application, and so I don't imagine it'll take too much time, but we'll get through it anyway. The Tasmania Police are moving their operations from Bridgewater to Glenorchy while they build the new Bridgewater station. So the Glenorchy Police Station presently has about 830 metres squared of unused space. I believe it's always been their intention to expand, and this is why they're going to do it presently. So I'd suggest we're all familiar with where the Glenorchy Police Station is.
sadly.
Pardon? Sadly, right. It's zoned commercial. Emergency services is the permitted use in the zone, so there's no question as to the appropriateness of what the land's being used for. Internal alterations, which is the bulk of the development, is exempt ordinarily from any planning assessment. But of course, what you do with the altered internals then can sometimes require the planning consideration. And so in this instance, by moving to a disused part of the site, unquestionably there will be more police officers, there will be more traffic movements. And so that really is all that was required to be assessed as part of this application. Even parking numbers, which should be familiar, is often something that we have to cogitate over. There is no parking requirement for emergency services if it's not fire or ambulance. So the only standard we've got to look at is the number of traffic movements. In doing so, the applicant provided a traffic impact statement because the traffic movements were over the allowable 20% or 40 vehicle movements per day. The traffic impact statement was received by our engineer, and the conclusion was agreed with that Harold Street and Main Road are able to accommodate the additional vehicle movements. I can read, I suppose, the main part. Generally, with the performance criteria, even if there is to be a bit of a traffic impost to be sustained, the need for the use is quite an important consideration and exercising discretion. And I don't think it's questionable that emergency services are important. And so for that reason, quite specifically, I think that it does comply with the performance criteria. The application was advertised as it must be, and the only representation received noted that they did not object to the proposal, but Tasrail just wanted good practice for being a neighbour to the State Rail network to be noted, and so we've got that advice, and it's recommended to append that to any permit that's issued. So in conclusion, with that one discretion, which I believe that the performance criteria is satisfied, the recommendation is that it be approved subject to conditions which are outlined in the agenda.
Thank you. Ask if any panel members have questions of the office at this point in time. No questions. So we do have a recommendation that this permit be granted. Could I ask for a mover for that particular item, please? So moved by Deputy Mayor Hickey. Seconder, Cookshaw. Did you wish to speak to the matter at all?
No, just that yes, I suppose, that I think it's a great use of that enormous building, and having extra police around in the vicinity will do Glenorchy no harm whatsoever. So I'm really pleased to see that there was so much space available in the building and that it's going to be activated. So I think that's a good thing all round.
Thank you. Any other comments? King.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I haven't been in that building for several meetings of the police. There's a lot of vacant space in there, and it's good use. I would imagine that, from my recollection, when that was Harvey Norman store, there was a lot more traffic flow back then than what the police are generating at the moment. So I don't, from my perspective, see it being a problem at all. And I imagine the Bridgewater police will be getting out as quick as they can and heading up to Bridgewater, and it'll be a home for them to come to on occasion, or bring people to, for that matter. So I don't see it being a major issue at all. And as Deputy Mayor said, I'm grateful to be more police in the area, even though they belong to Bridgewater.
Thank you. Yes, no, I too note that we did address some of the transport concerns there, with the road being marked for keep clear so that vehicles could turn right out of there in an emergency. Imagine most of these vehicles and the traffic will potentially turn left, so I don't see a big impact on the traffic there as well. It makes good use of the space, and we're happy to be good neighbours to our Bridgewater people. So thank you. Did you have anything you used to close debate?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to put the motion. All in favour, please raise your hand. Let's move unanimously. Just if you could explain the process from here, please. Thank you.
Sure. So the application's been decided by the Planning Authority, the decision being to approve the application. The applicant will be notified of the decision and has 14 days to appeal that decision. The representor will also be notified, similarly has 14 days to appeal the decision. As there is a representative with an appeal right, the applicant won't be able to make haste on their application as they otherwise may, and they'll have to wait that period.
Thank you very much for explaining that through for us. Move on now to item 6, so proposed use and development, partial demolition and multiple dwellings, 1 existing, 2 new. This is at 2 to 4 Ashbourne Grove, West Moona. So our planning officer on this one is Sylvia Jeffries. Over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is for 2 conjoined double-storey dwellings in the backyard of an existing dwelling. Ordinarily, staff would have delegation up to 5 dwelling units. However, this application has a shortfall of 1 car parking space. That's why it is before you. The first slide shows the location of the subject site. So the left-hand picture shows the general location. You notice there's rows of residential development along the roads, and the large area at the back, they are school grounds. The picture on the right shows more of a close-up of the subject site. So you see they've got a large backyard, and the dwelling is situated more towards the front. And you also notice that the neighbouring properties that are on the street corner, they sort of got a wedge-shaped property, and that is just kind of interesting in terms of where the shadows would fall, in terms of where the new building would go in the backyard. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is the zoning map. So you know this, there's the general residential zone where all the residential development is, and the yellow area at the back, that is the school area. That's the community purpose zone. Next slide, please. So this shows the proposed layout. So you notice the building at the back. It looks like it's got 4 different roof sections. There's 2 roof sections on the outside. They show there's part of the dwelling that's not double story, so that would be the lower height part of the proposed building. You'll also notice private outdoor space is on the side of each one of the dwellings. They'll have sliding doors going from the living areas to the private outdoor space, and you may only just be able to make out the waste storage areas. They are actually in front of the dwellings, but they are within the private outdoor space areas, which means that they will be screened. You also notice that the new dwelling is not 6 metres from the existing dwelling, which I'll get to when we talk about privacy. It's just the existing dwelling will be required to have some privacy film over one of the windows on the existing dwelling. Next slide, please. So this shows the elevations. You will notice on the right-hand side, the southwest elevation, that there are sort of smaller windows on the ground floor and 2 larger windows upstairs. Those windows are facing the school grounds, and it is causing a discretion, the distance that they are away from the school grounds. You will also notice on that picture a diagonal line which shows the building envelope. So you're looking at so they're the side elevations of the proposed dwellings. And so essentially, the way the building envelope is shown, like from the back boundary, so it's really sort of a corner that's facing the back boundary that steps outside the building envelope by a small amount. Next slide, please. So this just gives a bit of a more clarity of what the buildings will look like. You notice the white section is the lower section of the proposed dwellings, and that section is on either side. There's a lower section, and then sort of the brownish coloured part of it, that's a double-storey part of the proposed dwellings, and that goes as high as 6.79 metres. The lower section is only 2.7 metres, and that's relevant in terms of the distance it's away from the boundary. Next slide, please. So this is the existing house. It's sort of double-storey, although the undercroft area is not actually used for living. It's just used for a single carport. So that's the view from the street. Next slide, please. Again, you can see the garage. I managed to get a picture over the fence of the property. I wasn't able to go in the backyard because the person who lives there is not the applicant, so I couldn't ring them to ask to get access to the backyard. Next slide, please. And that it just shows the street. You notice the odd sort of spare car parking space. This is after school is finished, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Is there another slide? I'm not sure. Now we get to the discretions. Like I said before, it's mainly affecting the back boundary, or it would be if it wasn't a school that's at the back. The building is set back 1.5 meters, and normally for 6.79 meter height, it would have to be set back 4 meters, but because it's only a school property there, overshadowing won't really be an issue in terms of the height. Also, because there are the shorter side wings that are only 2.7 meters high, the setback to the high section of the proposed building is actually quite large, especially that's relevant for the neighbouring properties to the south. So by the time we're measuring the setback to the high section from the boundary, that will be 5.186 meters. It's sort of at an angle to property, so it increases to 9.072 meters, which is quite a substantial setback. Normally, like I said before, 6.779 meter height would normally require about a 4 meter setback. So that will be way more than that, even though the setback's normally measured on the lower story of the building, where it is 1.98 meters and 5.872 meters. So in terms, if there wasn't the rear setback discretion, there wouldn't actually be a discretion in terms of the side setback. It's only because of the rear setback being only 1.5 meters. Now, the next discretion is in terms of privacy for all dwellings. Normally, second story windows would have to be 4 meters away from the rear boundary. And they're not in this instance. It's more or less a technicality. There's the school grounds there, so there's no building opposite. So privacy won't be affected by that. The upstairs windows have the required distance away from the side boundary. And in terms to the existing dwelling, normally that would have to be 6 meters if there wasn't any opaque film on the windows, but that's supposed to go on to the existing dwellings, so that then actually complies in regards to that standard. Then the next discretion is in terms of waste storage for multiple dwellings. It's only really because the dwellings at the back have the waste storage in front of the dwellings that causes a discretion, even though it actually would be screened from sight with a fence. So it wouldn't really have any visual impact. The existing dwelling, they didn't show where the waste storage would go, but they have enough room to have a compliant area, so I recommended a condition for that. Then the last discretion is in terms of the car parking numbers. So there's a bank of 5 car parking spaces plus one more in the existing dwelling, so that's 6 car parking spaces. They're also required to have a visitor space. However, the engineer has assessed that and found that there was sufficient room on the street to accommodate 1 extra car parking space. And the next slide, please. We did receive 1 representation in terms of overshadowing to the people to the southwest. However, I spoke to the applicant, to the representative on the phone, and they hadn't realised that the building was stepping up and they understood that. They realised that there was actually quite a lot of separation, and they seemed to be happy with that. And also, how I explained it previously in my report too, that they wouldn't actually ordinarily, if it wasn't for the rear setback discretion, ordinarily that distance away from the boundary for the upstairs section is actually more than what ordinarily would be required. So it's not considered that there will be any adverse impact in terms of overshadowing. And also in terms of visual impact, I think the stepping up reduces the visual impact as well when looking from a neighbouring property. So it's considered that the proposal is acceptable in regards to that issue. And then we just got the last slide, which is recommending approval subject to conditions. I have recommended 3 conditions just for clarity. So one of the conditions is for the opaque film that's actually shown on the plans, but just to be clear. And then there's a condition in terms of waste storage that they're showing that on plans that they're submitting with a building permit application. And also there's a condition recommended for fencing just to ensure that they're within the exempt limits of the fencing. And so overall, the proposal is considered consistent with the planning scheme and is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that presentation. Do you have any questions of Sylvia based on that?
Yeah, thank you, through you, Chair. Just regarding and a little bit of background for this is that at my old primary school, and that is now residential homes. So that was completely knocked down, and then that land was then made available into residential homes. So my question is around that, the overshadowing, is that the discretions around the building facing the school are satisfactory now by discretion. What happens in the future if there was that land become residential? Does that then fall back on the land on the other side, or are we meant to be taking that into account? Or I just wanted to find out some detail around that. That was all.
Yeah, I can answer that. Well, normally we can't take into consideration future development because sometimes they go ahead, sometimes they not go ahead, and it depends on what sort of a form they go ahead. They will only be required to have their own setback requirements, which have to be in regards to the planning scheme. So they're not going to be any greater because that building is closer to the boundary. So in those sort of terms, it's not taken into consideration at this point in time. However, if they wanted to have a variation, for instance, if they wanted to go closer than what they normally would be allowed to by the planning scheme, then that may become a consideration.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. No, that's great, thank you. And my other question was regarding the street parking where the extra space is effectively being allocated on the street. Ashbourne's quite a narrow and a busy street. I just wanted to expand the understanding of how that was satisfactory, how that come around.
I'm not really sure because the engineers assessed it, but I think it is because there is parking available on both sides of the street, I suppose, and it's not, and obviously there must be enough capacity. It's not like it's a huge amount of a shortfall. It's only a shortfall of 1 car parking space for visitor space, but if you did need some more answers, maybe Bree can help with that.
Thank you. Bree, do you have any comments at all?
Yes. So when assessing this one, if we go by for every first 4 multiple buildings with one, we require 1 visitor parking like we did before, then this one wouldn't be a shortfall. It wouldn't trigger the performance criteria. But however, as we discussed this further and we thought that this is the right interpretation, we then put this one as a 1 parking shortfall. But how we justify these performance criteria, whether it's met or satisfied, is that the performance criteria 1 is actually the availability of off-street public car parking spaces within a reasonable walking distance of the site. So that's obviously, when we do the parking site survey, if we see that there are the spots available, then that satisfies the requirement. And with this one, I actually asked the developer to do this survey as well at the various times. So the response I received was considered satisfactory.
Okay, that's great.
Thank
you. No further questions. Thank you.
Could I just add to that and share that the question, well, I think what Sylvia said was the picture was taken at 4 o'clock when school was out. Is that when it was busier or quieter? Is that?
It's peak hour as well, yes.
It's peak hour as well.
Between 3 to, yeah.
So, okay, you were comfortable with it at peak hour, that was,
Yep.
that was the reference, right, that's fine.
No further questions?
I'd
Yes,
just like to probably make a statement. It's quite impressive to get 2 4-bedroom properties back into Glenorchy on that very large block. And that obviously needs in this time of housing crisis or houselessness crisis, that we'll be able to, see 2 new families potentially housed. So I think that's good outcome for this property.
thank you. Yes, just a comment from me that I just actually was noticing the use of, there's 2 parking spaces allocated to each of the 3 properties that are there anyway. So, some of those may not be used, so that, there may not even need to be the use of the road, depends on the household structure and whether they do have 2 vehicles or not. So I think 2 per unit is very generous as well. So I don't have a problem with that being the recommendation around the parking. I did appreciate the response to the on the applicant too regarding the overshadowing and the response that was given to the representative around that. So thank you for that. So we do have a recommendation before us. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that? So moved Alderman King and seconded Alderman Cockshut. Alderman King.
To follow up on the Deputy Mayor's comments, the additional housing within the area and the way that that's going to be fitted into that block, I think is a wonderful thing. And more of it will happen, I imagine, over years. I mean, that's not a prophecy or anything. It's just purely a case that there's a lot of larger blocks in the area, and I think this is going to be the case. But I think it's a good process that's taken place, and yeah, let's move forward.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Thank you, Chair. Just echo my fellow Alderman's comments. Also, I'd like to say, really detailed and strong report here, and great to see more housing available for people in our city. So, looking forward to seeing it get built and the end result.
Thank you. Any further comments? Anything to close debate?
No.
Thank you. Put the motion all in favour. Just raise your hand. It's carried unanimously. Thank you. If you could again explain the outs on this one.
I do, yeah. So the application has been decided by the Planning Authority, the decision being to approve the application. The applicant will be notified of the decision, has 14 days to appeal. Similarly, the representative will be notified of that decision and has 14 days to appeal. The applicant will not be able to commence until that period has elapsed.
Thank you very much. So that concludes our meeting today. I thank our online audience, our audience here, and planning staff for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at our future meeting. Thank you very much. Meeting closed, and it is 4:05.